first item of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item, open Marisol, do we have anybody for open comment period? Okay.
These around each side of the room, please, and take a copy. I'll wait till it gets about halfway down and before I start talking. Don't count my time. Okay, Roger, before the meeting, Roger asked me to point out to you that we're talking about planning dollars. These are not yet hard dollars, but an astute programmer who wants projects on the list and get them, you get them in the plan even if it's 5, 6, 7 years out, and then eventually time keeps going down and your project will come up and then it'll become very hard to take it out. You can argue that, hey, this has been on the approved plan and you darn well aren't going to take it out, and that's a lot of the fights that happen down here. So a good programmer just in the budgeting process knows how to use the system. Last month at the MPO meeting, Eduardo Cabo, during the his executive director portion, mentioned if a community wants to take road tolls off of a toll road, it had to use its own resources to do it. Well, here's where you can get some needed resources. Now now just remember that there's also different pots of money. It's from the unneeded $142.7 million streetcar phase 2 project in FY 2023. Or that project funding could go towards El Paso's portion of the Northeast Anthony Gap bypass project, which is in the long-range program for 2030. So, Councilman Morgan, please ask why this $142.7 million streetcar phase 2 expansion project has a higher priority over that long-delayed Northeast Anthony Gap project. Councilman Rivera, after last month's MPO meeting, you told me there were some who were examining a bridge project which would greatly aid in moving traffic in a very congested area, providing vital relief to those daily impacted. There's another opportunity. Since some of our small communities have demonstrated in past MPO meetings that they are unafraid to speak up on transportation projects or issues vital to their communities, I'm surprised you are not raising holy hell over this unneeded 142 million street. 2 minutes? Well, I took time. It took, what, about a minute and a half to pass that out to everybody? Well, can you give me an extra minute and a half, Mr. Chairman?
Sir, yes, sir. You can just.
Do you need a vote on that, or can you do that yourself?
I think we'd have to take a vote of the body.
I hope everybody will be generous to dear old Mr. Rooney.
Okay, may I entertain a motion to grant Mr. Rooney one additional minute for public comment?
Second.
There's a motion. Second. All in favor?
Thank
Okay,
you
Mr. Rooney.
very much. I'm trying to help you out. So there's some money there. After El Paso raised so much public hell and legal hell with the state of Texas, with our courts of inquiry, The unanswered paradox for me answers, why does this body corporate seem afraid to question this $142.7 million streetcar project? Apparently has a higher priority than removing the road toll from the soon-to-be completed Border Highway West or from the Anthony Gap Northeast project. And all I'm suggesting, I know there's a lot of people, or not a lot of people, that some want streetcars. Well, you can move, my recommendation, move that from 2023, that 142.7 million, 27 million to 2030, then move the Northeast Parkway up. Jay told me where I could get on the streetcar project for the free ride. I took it. I found that it was crowded. It had a high interior noise level. It's last century's technology, and you can certainly put that planning money to better use, and I hope you'll take the opportunity. Thank you, and thank you for letting me have that extra time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rooney. Okay, next item, we have discussion and action regarding the approval of the minutes for the July 2016-2019 TPB meeting.
So moved.
A motion and a second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Abstention? One abstention. Motion passes. Item number 2, discussion and action. Or, Marisol, I'm sorry for stealing your thunder there. If you want to read the item, go ahead.
Action to approve recommendations from the Transportation Project Advisory Committee. Sorry. Discussion and action to approve recommendations from the Transportation Project Advisory Committee to amend the Destino 2019-2022 Transportation Improvement Program to add fiscal year 2023 and program the NM 213 widening from 2-lane to a 4-lane project with limits from NM 404 to Texas State Line in fiscal year 2023.
Thank you. Mr. Calvo.
Yeah, just for a little bit of information here. There was a similar item that was presented here to the policy board last time, but this is cleanup. It's more administrative than anything else. The funding that we're talking about is specifically for fiscal year 2023, which is beyond the TIP years for the Texas side of our TIP. So one of the actions that we're creating a fiscal year 23 just for the New Mexico TIP, which is okay with New Mexico DOT procedures, so that we can program those funds. So the actual action is to program the funds in 2023. The rest of the funding for New Mexico 404 and 213 were programmed last month.
Okay. Can everybody hear clearly? I know that there's probably some issues with the mic, but I also want to be sure that on audio, in case if there's members of the public watching, that the mics are working. Okay. Okay.
Greg McNichol, Chairman, obviously, thank you, Lago, for explaining exactly what the action is. So it's recommended to you by the TPAC.
Okay. Okay. Are there any questions from the body before we move to approve? Okay. There's a motion from Alderman Miller, a second from Mayor Perea. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item.
By the El Paso MPO Executive Director to TxDOT during the public comments period on the draft fiscal year 2020 Unified Transportation Program to direct the Executive Director to attend August 29th, 2019 Texas Transportation Committee meeting.
Mr. Chair, Eduardo Calvo, Executive Director of the MPO. So we brought this item to you just to inform you of the letter that I submitted on behalf of the MPO following the discussion that we had last month, where the board could not officially direct me to make specific comments, but the two comments that I included in this letter are basically related to CMAQ, which is Category 5, and we discussed it last time. It has to do with the fact that because there is one more non-attainment area in the state of Texas, there is less funding for the original non-attainment areas like us. That means that throughout the life of the UTP, which is 10 years, the San Antonio metropolitan area, or the MPO area, which is now in non-attainment, is getting 220 million. So those 220 are being carved out of the allocations for the other regions that include Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, El Paso, and Beaumont. So we brought that to the attention of the board, and obviously the idea was to have the Texas Transportation Commission somehow find the money to supplement, to make us whole, so that we wouldn't be affected. The impact to us, which you will see in the backup information, is that for every year we will be our allocation will be reduced by approximately $2 million, which means that in the tip years, which is in the first of 4 years or the next 4 years, we need to make sure that we meet the fiscal constraint, which means that we're going to have to deprogram something to match the new allocations. You see on the screen and in your backup information, based on the new allocations that are shown in the UTP, there's about a $2 million, about $2.2 million in the red for several years. And in the first table, you also see that there are several projects that are programmed by the city of El Paso, by the county, by Sun Metro, and TxDOT. So this will be now discussed. This is going to go to the TPAC so that we can, figure out a way that we can come up and meet the fiscal constraint. So that was one of the items. The rest of the tables there show the specific projects that are currently programmed in our TIP. And again, so those are the projects that are going to be discussed, and we need to find a way to deprogram, select a project or several projects so that we again meet the new allocations. The second comment that we included in the letter has to do with tolling, and I just want to take this opportunity to clarify something that Mr. Rooney said. The comment about tolling is really what I believe I said last time, is really tolling is more of a local option. That if a community chooses to include tolls in a project as a way to fund and finance projects, that's more of a local decision, right? In the case of Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth have traditions of many years for incorporating tolling to their projects. So the comment was related to the UTP, where the commission decided to, or the proposal is to remove tolling elements from certain projects in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, in Houston, Beaumont, and FAR. I'm sorry, not in Dallas, but it's in FAR, Houston, and Beaumont. If you see that in the table, it's about $1.5 billion of funding of projects that were already in the pipeline. The impact to us is that now there's $1.5 billion more of demand, and communities and TxDOT now need to find these dollars, the $1.5 billion, from other funding sources, from traditional funding sources, which affect us at the state level. So the comment really was, if communities are choosing to toll, then why is the state coming in and imposing or doing that pretty much as a unilateral decision, right? At the last or several commission meetings, there has been comment from the other communities, and I think Representative Ortega, you were there at a couple of them, where they were expressing the same feelings. Like, these projects, because of the removing that piece of their funding, these projects now are going to be delayed. First, because they need to find the money to build them, and second, because they have to go through the NEPA process again, do reevaluations, and that is not a fun thing to do. It takes time. So those are the two comments that we submitted.
In speaking to a couple of board members, there was an idea that was floated that if it would be appropriate to, for me to attend the commission meeting, which is happening next week, where the commission will be approving the UTP, the fiscal year 20 UTP. And again, following the what we learned from last meeting where, I think it was, we needed authorization from the board to make specific comments. So that's why we put this item as a discussion and action. So I will be attending, and it's up to you to ask me to make specific comments if you so wish. If not, then there is really no need to act on this item.
I certainly think you should attend. Certainly think you should comment. We need to establish our presence there more than we have in the past. My secondary thought on that is, although you're an excellent spokesman for the group, should we not have more support there also? Should maybe some of our representatives be there, as many people there as can be there as possible? Optics are everything in this thing. And perhaps some of our representatives can also be there inside of the meeting just to show support for El Paso. I don't think we have had this in the recent meetings, and I think it might be important, particularly for this one.
I do want to echo that, what Alderman Miller said. I mean, I do think it's important, it's not that you go there by yourself, but that you also have support, from board members of the MPO. I know it can be difficult with schedules, but, this is why we all serve on the MPO, and it's to go and advocate for our community, and I appreciate what Mr. Caldwell is doing, and I know Representative Ortega has also made an effort to spend as much time as possible going to as many commission meetings as she can. Representative, if you wanted to speak on that.
Yeah, I've got to agree with what our executive director is saying. I think one of the things that I've seen in the past is our community has not participated the way it needs to participate over at the commission level when it comes to transportation. And I have been attending either the workshop or the commission meeting since session was over, and it's my intent to continue to attend because it makes a difference. It gives you an opportunity to talk to the commissioners. It gives you an opportunity to make a public statement in terms of what is on the agenda, what the intent is. And one of the things that was really obvious to me as soon as session was over and when I started attending was there was nobody from El Paso going to these meetings. And you see people from all of the other surrounding metro communities that are there. And they're there for a reason. And it's not only, say, there's a state representative, or it's not only the MPO director, there's a lot of local district engineers, as well as people from the community itself. I mean, there are projects, they're there pushing for their projects and what they're seeking funding for, and we haven't been doing that. And I did speak to our executive director about being there as often as he could and making comments. And there was comments that were made at the last meeting from a MPO director with regard to tolling and how the fact that not being able to get that extra funding for their community is really going to hurt them, because transportation funds, even though there was more monies this last session available, they're not always there. And it's the communities that are pushing to get their projects done that actually end up getting the monies. And if we're not there pushing and on the tolling, and the whole point of that MPO director being there was, we're not gonna have the monies to do our project. So what happens is, they want the monies, so they're seeking funding through one of the category fundings of TxDOT on the allocation. So that means that those communities that are not pushing for their projects are not gonna get the monies, because they've gotta get the funding somewhere. And so I think our director certainly ought to be able to speak up for our community and make sure that there are other people, not just him, that are present at these meetings, because transportation, as we know, is really key to infrastructure to our community, and the fundings that we've received in the past have not been adequate. So I thank him for saying, yes, I want to be there next week. And we, as a delegation, or it was my intent to attend that meeting next week, but I can't because we're going to have another roundtable in our community on what's going on with what happened at Walmart. And so I cannot be present, so we need to have other people from this community there.
So just a couple of comments. You've heard me say this a lot. We absolutely need to have a presence out there in Austin and other places, but specifically with the Texas Transportation Commission, and the more the merrier. But it is so important to have a consistent message, make sure that we all communicate, we're sending the same message consistently, whether it's from the MPO, whether it's from the state delegation, individual board members, the district and all that. We all locally as a region, we have to be on the same page so that the message is consistent. We start having problems when we start having conflicting messages and all that, and again, giving the impression that again, we don't have our priorities established and all that. So that is something that again, so in principle, I completely agree, the more the merrier, but we have to have a message to speak and be consistent with that.
Yes.
I would just add, I agree with everything you said and what the representative said as well. I would tell you that the ones that are most effective are the groups like I-35 Coalition, Midland-Odessa Transportation, which is called MOTRAN. We did something in West Texas called Ports to Plains. We were able to get $250 million. We were able to get a U.S. corridor designation. And it all happened because we were all of the same mind. We set up a 501c6 in order to lobby, in order to advocate, in order to all say the same thing. But you're right. If we go there and we have one group say one thing, another group say another group say another, and we say we're all from El Paso, it'll be for naught. And it'll probably be better not to go if that's what we're going to do. So we have to make sure we aggregate our thoughts and our focus and our coalition and call it something. I think there's a lot in the name, a lot in what we're calling ourselves and what we're representing. It's not anything new. It's something that's already been done by a lot of other groups, and they've been very successful with it.
To that end, I would move that we direct our executive director to attend the Texas Transportation Commission meeting next Thursday, and to comment before the board as stated there.
You know, before we entertain that motion, you know, in speaking to Mr. Caldwell in preparation for today's agenda, you know, I mean, personally, I think this is just something that's part of his job. I mean, I think he should be attending as many commission meetings as possible. And Mr. Caldwell, you know, what would be helpful, I think, for the board, even though, you know, we all have access and could do this, but perhaps if you can, you know, forward the commission's agenda to us, you know, as soon as possible, so that way any of us who are interested in attending could make arrangements to possibly join you. Give us a heads up on items that are on the agenda so we could speak. But I wanted to get a sense from the board, you know, I mean, do we want to have a standing item every time there's a commission meeting to direct him? I mean, well, in all fairness, because there could be controversial items where he may not have clear direction on what position to take. So but nonetheless, I do think it is within his role to go to as many of these meetings as possible and to speak on behalf of our community. Representative.
You know, I have a question. You know, we're directing you to go and speak on our behalf. Why do we need to direct you? Wouldn't you just be speaking on our strategic plan? I mean, don't we know what you're going to go and speak on behalf of the MPO?
And that's exactly the point. So, yeah, I don't think I need authorization from you all just to attend the meeting and all that, but the message, I think, is very important. So, as executive director, yeah, I can go in and make, you know, generic comments and all that, you know, vanilla type of comments. But when it comes to controversial items, I think as the executive director, I need to be very careful because I may not be speaking for the board, right? And that's very important for, you know, for me. I mean, I need to speak for the board. So there may be some items that where I do need clear direction, and here our legal counsel is, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but there may be some cases where I do need some clear direction from the board.
Representative Ortiz?
I was gonna say, I think it's something that we have to count on his own, I guess, discretion as to when he believes it's something that he needs to address, and we have to rely on him to, if it is something that's controversial, for him to raise it before he goes over there, if he knows it's on the agenda, and seek guidance from the board as to what, if anything, he ought to be addressing. So I think it's just gonna be on a case-by-case basis.
Absolutely, and I think it's gonna be easier, and to your point, I mean, don't we know what the, what the priorities are, what the program is and all that? I don't think we do. We need to. I mean, that's one of the things that I'm emphasizing, and you'll hear it in one of the following items, that we need to have a clear program so that, and agree on it, so that it's fairly easy for me to go and I know what I'm gonna be talking about. And, if it's something specific, but it's based on the plan, on the program, on the priorities that have been established. Yeah, I don't think I need to come here and ask you every meeting for, can I attend and can I say this or that? But it's one of the things that I think we need to have a clear direction, have very well understanding what the priorities are, what the message is. And again, not just for me, but for anybody that goes and attends, whether it's, elected officials or the private sector, the mobility coalition and all that.
City Manager?
So, Chairman, just before I make these comments, I say this with all due respect and for entire love for this community. So I'm not saying it just because, these different parts of the state do whatever. But in the Panhandle, in the Valley, in North Texas, the priorities are clear. And that is that you have to fight the war on two fronts. I think our problem has been that we all want our own little projects, and we don't look at the prize, the big project that we should be working towards as well. So I think that we should have an understanding that we should get our fair share. That should be one of the arguments. And the other argument should be whatever big project we want to go after. Whether people like it or not, or think it's important or not, we need to agree on what the big projects are. I know there's been talk about a deck plaza. I know there's been talk about extending the trolley that some people hate and some people like. When you look at a downtown and you look at connecting uptown with downtown, we have to decide what we're going to do. And we can't forget the small cities that are surrounding us. We can't forget the regional transportation aspect of it. But the war needs to be fought on two fronts, and that is our fair share, which is one fight, and that is all our respective dollars that we all should be getting. That's one fight. And the other fight should be the big project. We're big enough city, big enough region, but we should fight for both fronts, on both fronts rather. And other communities do the exact same thing. They ask for what they should be getting, and they argue for their fair share, and they make that argument. We started that discussion last time, where proportionally we're not getting our fair share. That's one argument and one fight, and then the other fight is the big project we should be working towards. And I think we need to agree as an MPO that that's what we want to do, and that's what's been lacking. And that's what Mr. Calvo is talking about, that we don't have a plan, we don't have priorities, and we go out there and we're all going to be asking for different things, and we shouldn't be asking for the small projects that we should already be getting our fair share for. And that's been, I think, our stumbling block. And that's what other communities do, and that's what we should be doing.
Right. And you raise a good point. And in my conversations with the executive director, he has raised that about the need for our communities to speak with one voice, not just as a governmental entity as the MPO, but also other advocacy groups in our community. And staff is aware of this. And at some point, Mr. Calvo, I don't know if you want to talk about the intent to bring forward. We have our planning documents, but also bringing forth some sort of other plan where everybody is hopefully on the same page when we come to these types of meetings in terms of advocating for specific projects.
You're talking?
The 5-year, short-term 5-year plan is.
Absolutely, which is what we want to talk about. I think that's more of a strategic way of moving forward with our priority projects. Following the example of the 2008 Comprehensive Mobility Plan that as a region, we all worked on, I think that's a really good model to follow. It was a number of projects that were, the region agreed that these were the priority projects. It was great. It was multimodal. It was, included highway improvements, but included also transit projects, aesthetics. Geographically, it was distributed, throughout the region, but it was very strategic. It was multiple projects to complete Loop 375, which is obviously one of our priorities, and so on. So something like that is what we intend to coordinate, to organize with all the agencies here locally, and that will clearly establish all the priorities. You know, we'll be looking at all the projects, we'll do some evaluation of individual projects and rank them, and then come here, bring it to the technical advisory, to the TPAC, and then obviously to the TPB, and we'll discuss it, and we'll, you know, I'm sure it's gonna be multiple discussions and all that. But once we have that plan, that really becomes our roadmap, I mean, our guide. And that's where all of us, we buy in, MPO, district, private sector, all of us, and then we go in consistently and look for funding to implement these, you know, these projects. What these projects are, that's what we need to discuss in the next few weeks.
Mr. Chairman, are we gonna have a strategy, an action plan, a task force to do that, to identify or to start the whole case of arguing or advocating or lobbying for the fact that we don't have our fair share, one? And then secondly, what are our 3 or 4 big priority projects?
You know, that's probably gonna have to be an agenda item that,
Yes,
I could
was
see
about
our
to
lawyer
mention that, because
already looking
We're
at.
having a really good discussion.
Yes.
But it's not on the agenda, and it's straight, pretty far away from what is on
Sergio,
the agenda.
Sergio, what we need to do in the future,
Yes, sir.
please get with the chairman and make some of these agenda items broader. I mean, we've had a lot of those points come up from, not you, but previous attorneys, and now you,
Right.
about we can't discuss something. We need to make these broader, so we can have a more robust discussion about these policy issues that the board needs to take up.
And I think this item was limited to just the immediate meeting coming up, but you're right, it does eventually venture off into other larger policy questions. And that's something that we're gonna have conversation with staff, is how is this policy board gonna come together and approach those priorities? You know, whether that be we establish an ad hoc committee, whether the executive committee, you know, go through that, but that'll be for another thing. So, are there any comments before we entertain a motion? So unfortunately, we're only posted for action for the August 29th, 2019 Texas Transportation meeting. But I'm sensing that there's a clear consensus among the board to give him direction, obviously to speak at all meetings, not just this one. But I think, as Representative Ortega has said, you know, you're gonna have to use your professional judgment on when it is you need, you know, more policy guidance from the MPO, or from the Transportation Policy Board, regarding maybe controversial items or other things that are probably more specific in nature.
That works for me. And
Okay.
again, let me say that the part of the intent of bringing this item to include it as part of this meeting was really to spark the discussion. I mean, I think it's really important, you know, to start discussing these items and to let you know what's coming. And then, of course, make sure that we're abide by the rules and the laws and all that. But the intent is really to bring many of these items for discussion and initiate it, and then, you know, discuss it more in detail as we move forward.
Okay, well, Alderman Miller has already made the initial motion. Is there a second to this
Second.
item? Okay, there is a motion and a second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, next item.
Report, Region Mobility Plan.
All right. Again, Eduardo Calo with the Executive Director of the MPO. So this is a very short presentation that continues the discussion that we were just having about the mobility plan. This we presented to the TPAC, to the Transportation Project Advisory Committee, earlier, and we are continuing moving with this. So again, as I said before, the intent is to develop a plan that we're looking at projects that could be implemented in about 5 years. But, and again, the intent is to make it multimodal, to make it, you know, geographically distributed within the region. Multimodal, again, highway transit, active transportation, which is bicycle, pedestrian, and really looking at freight. But again, we have to look at all the priorities that this region has in terms of mobility, in terms of quality of life, in terms of a cross-border, the movement of freight and people across the border, and so on. Once we come up with a plan, whatever the plan is. Again, it has to reflect the priorities, it has to reflect consensus, so that all of us go out and with the same message. The main inputs that I think are critical to develop this plan or this strategy is really coming, first of all, from the congestion management process. As you all know, this is something that is written in the federal regulations. So we are, at the same time as we develop all this, we are updating the congestion management process, which is specifically looking at hotspots for congestion. So obviously, it's one of the very important inputs for identifying and selecting projects specifically for congestion. But that's not the only thing. The regional mobility strategy, that is something that as a region we've been working on. Again, the RMS we presented to you several times. This is more of a high-level exercise that is helping us develop a vision for the region. And then once we establish that vision, coming down and looking at projects that help us achieve that vision. So it's more of a high level, but RMS has been identifying some clear needs and some clear priorities for the region, including the highway projects, including transit and cross-border elements as well. So what we've been asking, and this is something that the MPO as staff, will take the lead. We have begun talking individually to all the MPO partners, and also asking them to send us a list of priority projects that, again, maybe could be implemented in 5 years, but that are priority for your communities. I wouldn't worry too much initially if they are currently in the MPO plan or not, because if it is a priority, then we'll make it happen, including adding the projects into the plan and later on into the transportation improvement program as we identify funding for them. And of course, we need to do an evaluation and prioritization of these projects, so that all of us, again, we look at them, we evaluate them, and once we agree, then those are the projects that we will move forward with. And again, a lot of it has to depend also on how ready the projects are, their development schedule. I mean, it's not the same thing to do a major highway project that requires a long environmental document versus something that may be simpler. But again, that helps us also put our projects in a timeline. Not all the projects need to be implemented at the same time, and that's also going to help us with a funding strategy. We don't need all the money exactly at the same time. It's something that is staggered. Once we develop that financial plan as well, that is also something that when we go out and talk to, whether it's a commission, to the legislature, whatever it is, we are showing that we have a pretty, smart strategy based on 5 to 7 years where the funding could be needed. And so with that, the tentative schedule that we're looking at. And this is tied also to the TxDOT fiscal year 20 and 21 UTP. As we've been discussing, the fiscal year 20 UTP is what the commission is or plans to approve or is scheduled to approve next week. However, the process to develop the fiscal year 21 UTP is starting actually in September. So what I think is strategically for us, what is very important is for us to be able to have our plans ready and our priorities ready so that we can match the fiscal year 21 UTP and make sure that our projects are inserted into the mix as TxDOT does their internal evaluation of projects. And then we have ample time to do what we need to do as far as requesting the funding and showing up at the commission meetings, do what we need to do to make sure that these projects get funded in the fiscal year 21 UTP. So again, we will be developing a more detailed schedule, and we'll be working again with TPAC and individually with all the different agencies, and we'll keep you informed. But this is our plan right now.
comments from members of the board?
Well, Chair, it seems like this goes back to our previous discussion, that this is the platform that we use to begin to form the advocacy groups that the city manager is talking about. We need what you're talking about here before we can actually do what, except for the one part. For the second part, I think we can start immediately as advocating for our fair share, of course. But for the second part, we need to go through these exercises, and from that, we'll develop the whatever steering committee or whatever you want to call it from that. But we that's the place we start to make our agreements. I think it's great.
Okay, there's no action for this item?
No.
Next item.
Reports on the availability of 12 million of coordinated border infrastructure funds in fiscal year 2020.
Good morning. I'm Roger Williams, Assistant Director here at the El Paso MPO. We want to make everybody aware that there's $12 million of coordinated border infrastructure funds that are available to the region. We had this item at the TPAC last month, and we've sent out notice to our representatives and agencies here in the MPO. These are funds that are only available to areas such as the El Paso area for projects as it relates to border infrastructure and programs. And there's $36 million actually that's been identified in the 2020 UTP. And 12 million of those are identified for the El Paso region. These are not new funds, they're reconciled funds. But these funds, as many of you know, we've had them here before. We have programmed down a lot of CBI funds, but these particular CBI funds are for the year 2020. They need to be let in the year 2020, so there's a real tight time frame. So we've gone through the process of identifying some projects that are already in the MTP and the TIP that might be eligible. We'll be going back to the TPAC this next month, and there have been a couple of projects that have been identified that are going to be examined by the TPAC and then recommended to the TPB for approval for funding. There's specific requirements. Basically, these funds need to go towards moving cargo and or people across the ports of entry, or for infrastructure that's within a 50-mile radius of a border. Now, the state might put more stringent requirements on that. I'm understanding that they have narrowed that down to 25 miles, but nevertheless, anything within our region would be eligible as far as it meets that requirement. In this case, these projects need to be shovel-ready, pretty much ready to go now, and it would be really good if they already have a CBI application. There's not a lot of projects that meet that requirement at this point in time. The other thing about this is that we need to have projects that will not impact conformity. So air quality being one of the main purposes that we have to assure that we are in compliant with. If a new project comes in that wouldn't be within the MPO documents or within the right time frame of our model, then those projects wouldn't be eligible. We would take the TPAC recommendation, bring it forward to the TPB next month, and then it would have to go into the next STIP revision. And to get it through that STIP process and approved, we are thinking probably early next year, January timeframe. That's really a tight time frame to turn around these projects and get this money programmed down on something here. So there's a couple of projects that we're already looking at that might meet this requirement. And we need to do some examination of those projects at the staff level, bring that back to the TPAC, get that recommendation. So we'll have this before you next month for your consideration. These, again, I would just like to emphasize, these are not new funds, these are reconciled funds. So we're one of the 3 regions that are eligible for this. I think there was 12 million to the Laredo, 12 million to the FAR district, and this this 12 million to us. My understanding is there might be some future CBI funds coming down the road too. Again, though, these are specific for this time frame. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Yes, ma'am.
How many projects are you considering, and do the amounts exceed the 12 million, or are they under 12 million?
We're looking at a couple of projects right now that are, one in particular already has funding on it that was programmed in a previous, the previous TIP and MTP. And that would be a Loop 375 project that needs additional funding for ramps and frontage roads. We're also considering some design money, and we're double checking to make sure that it's eligible for a project that would be a future project for the extension of old Waco tanks. There's also some projects that we're looking at that might have already some CBI money on them that we could consider putting this on, that might free up additional money that has, that project might have some SDP and CMAQ on it, but we're not real sure about that one yet. Anything else that is out there is really not in the preview at this point in time, and that's mainly because of the time frame for it. CBI in the past has been no specific time frame, no year put on it, and there was no, the funds wouldn't expire. This is quite different though in this case, and that's why we're specifically looking at these projects that we know could be eligible and could perhaps get the funding on them in 2020.
But the amount of the projects, are we going to be exceeding the 12 million? Are we way under the 12 million? Where are we?
Well, with one of them, there's less than 12 million because it would be for preliminary engineering. Then the project itself, we're working to get the estimate on that for the construction project, which would be further out. The one for the Loop 375 actually didn't have enough money on it, and it needs an additional 12 million, and that would probably be about what would be for the Loop 375 project, what they would need.
So Chair, again, the guidance that we're getting is that the 12 million needs to be programmed fairly quickly. So, I mean, fairly quickly probably means in the next, within this year. In other words, we're not looking at saving this money for something that could be used for a project in 3 or 4 years. So this needs to be programmed fairly fast. So we're looking for opportunities for projects, like Roger said, that are already approved for CBI use or CBI eligible. And again, the opportunity here is to perhaps put in the CBI money for a project that is ready, so that we can free up some other funding category, like category 5 or 7, that is more flexible, that could be used for other projects. So, but again, we're looking at those opportunities, and like Roger said, we'll work with TPAC and bring you to the policy board for final action.
I'm sorry, I may have missed this in the beginning. So you said if they had CBI, if their project already has CBI component to it already, what are those? You mentioned Loop 375. Can you be more descriptive of what we're talking about? What is that project that you're commissioning? Because it sounds like,
That particular,
without, without taking action, it sounds like
yeah.
there's a fit there, but I want to know what it is.
Right. That particular project being very close to the Wynn Road project, and also the the widening project on Loop 375 Americas by the Zaragoza Port of Entry, and all the truck traffic that's there, and how that would help with relieving some of that congestion.
No, that's good. And the reason I asked the question is, I know we have CBI designations. I think some of them are questionable whether they're really coordinated in terms of helping to alleviate some of our issues that we encounter at the port of entry and the border. We have to be doing things further away from port of entry with those funds. And while probably holistically it impacts the system, I want to make sure that we're looking
and
at
that's
directly tied to alleviating the issues that we see on the recoveries and everything.
That's a good point. The Federal Highway Administration will if a project is submitted to them for CBI, there's a whole different application process they have to go through and determine the eligibility for that it does meet the requirements of the CBI funding. And that's why, and when we sent out the notification of these funds, it was highly emphasized that if you have a project that already has CBI on it, then you would be able to basically get through that process a lot quicker.
Thank you, Gary.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, we're not scheduled for action on this item either, is this just a report?
Right, thank you.
Next item.
Item number 6, call for projects for New Mexico Surface Transportation Program, large urban, and congestion mitigation and air quality mandatory for fiscal year 2020.
Good morning, Gabriela Lopez with the El Paso MPO. The CMAQ mandatory and STP large urban project call for funds 2020 fiscal year for the New Mexico portion of the MPO planning area has been extended. The new deadline for submitting the draft request forms are September 6th. We did extend in order to provide more time for the sponsor entities to give a more complete application. And we are on a tight timeline because the projects need to be obligated by August 15 in order to meet the 2020 fiscal year funds deadline. Any questions regarding the project call?
Any questions from members?
The new deadline is September 6th.
Any other questions? Thank you. Next item.
Projects for New Mexico STP, large urban, and CMAQ mandatory for fiscal year 2021, 2022, and 2023.
So this is just to inform you that we will have a project call for the similar CMAQ mandatory and STP large urban funds, but for fiscal year 21, 22, and 23. The project won't open until next year, but we just wanted to give you inform you in advance that the official announcement will probably be in January at our TPAC meeting, but this is just to let you know of a upcoming project call and to keep an eye open so that you can start thinking about the projects that you want to submit. Any questions?
Members, any questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, just clarification, these are for New Mexico. These are New Mexico funds.
Okay, thank you. Next item.
Item number 8, Executive Director Report. A, report the Kyle Warden Park Tour in Dallas, Texas.
Again, Eduardo Calvo, Executive Director of the MPO. So we put this item on the agenda before making this trip, and the trip was actually yesterday. So first of all, I want to thank the El Paso District of TxDOT for putting together a really good show. We were invited, and several other entities were invited on a tour to see the Clyde Warren Park in the Dallas area. Mr. Gonzalez, you were there as well, and I think that was it for board members. But again, the Dallas District and the MPO, the North Central Texas COG, which is the MPO for the Dallas-Fort Worth area, they put together a really good show. And again, thank you, the district folks, as part of the Reimagine I-10. And again, it was a very interesting and eye-opening experience to see the park in action. After that, they gave us a pretty interesting presentation on how the whole idea came about. There are some very obvious opportunities for the project here in El Paso for I-10. Some major differences as well in terms of how the project could be implemented, specifically with Clyde Warren. What is also interesting, at least it was new for me as well, is that there are other projects within the Dallas-Fort Worth area, similar concepts of decking the freeways, and so that the freeways, instead of becoming barriers between communities, you find a way to connect them. And again, seeing Clyde Warren in action is very interesting. Mr. Chair, they provided us, they gave us a presentation yesterday. It's about 90 slides. They gave us a copy that I have here with me. We can zoom in if you all are interested in looking at it. I don't know, Mr. How many of you want to chime in or anything about the trip?
All I wanted to say is, or the only thing I'd add to what you've said is I was there whenever the concept was put together, and Ramon Miguez, who is with HDR now, was also an assistant city manager the same time I was there. And it worked because the private sector stepped up for that project, and that's a good example of how that project did not get in the way of other projects that were on the list. And I think that us as an MPO, at least the 5 years I've been here, everybody's kind of jockeying for their projects, and I think that's the reason why it's important that, especially since the state legislators are here, that that we fight the good fight on, and a smarter fight on how we look at getting our fair share, which would not impact our communities, and then look at big projects that we can't ignore, that we have to look at, because it does have an opportunity to take us to another level and keep us in a competitive situation with other cities in Texas.
Are there any key takeaways as it relates to new proposals in New Basel? Any challenges that came to mind when they gave this presentation, so that we're aware, I guess, ahead of time?
Challenges, I think all of them.
Yeah.
You know, they told us a little bit about the history, about the project, and again, you know, I think that the thinking of the people that were behind the project, you know, initially was thought as very ambitious. They were receiving comments of, you know, you're crazy, this is never going to happen, you know, too difficult to come with, all the challenges you can imagine, because again, it's not a simple project. It is complicated, it's expensive, but again, I think it's very telling when you see it in action, you know, what it does for communities. I think it's a really good story. However, challenges, again, for engineering, funding, public, you know, acceptance, I mean, all the challenges.
Well, I think also what's important to mention is the fact that I think that a lot of folks, when they look at a project like this, they say, well, why are we going to do this? This is the second coming of the trolley, or just another project that we don't need, and we have all these needs in the community. Same needs existed in Dallas. Same thing. So when we were there, what we were looking at is how can we look at funds that we otherwise would not be able to tap into. So we were able to get, I believe it was $46 million from the feds and other, from the state as well, that they weren't using. And so we tapped into those funds that were not being used, and we otherwise would not have had a chance to get those dollars. So, you know, we were of the opinion if those dollars aren't going to come to us, or they're going to go somewhere else, and we weren't going to get them anyway for these other projects, we need to go after it. So it's not dissimilar to what happened with the trolley. I mean, with the fact that when y'all went after that here, you wouldn't have gotten it for something else. A lot of people think you would have, but you wouldn't have. It was in a different category of funding. So in the cities I've been in, we never said no to money, you know, and I think y'all are the same way. We're the same way here. So I think that's what I think we can't lose sight of, is that if we were to do something like this, that there's other dollars out there that we could tap into, not only at the state level, but the federal level, so that way it doesn't impact our community projects.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, would you ask staff to forward the presentation to the board members?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're gonna have to do a thumb drive, guys. Think it's too big to just email.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, well, yes, sir.
Also, you know, it's great that we're talking about the dollars when it comes to a project like this, but I think we need to do a deep dive and see what the actual impact of a project this massive will have on the entire community. Because as we know, we have the Borderland Expressway. That is absolutely key to the success of this project, because a project like a decking project of this nature is going to shut our traffic down. We see the impact on I-10 for you know, accidents, or I-10, go I-10 expansion, and we've seen how it has slowed and diverted traffic. Project of this size it's not going to happen, you know, in a silo all by itself. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier, about having a clear understanding of what our strategy is moving forward, because To me, this project right here goes hand in hand with the Borderland Expressway. The diversion of that commercial traffic is going to be absolutely critical to us. I think we can handle regular everyday flow, so on and so forth, but when these trucks are delayed, that ends up turning into dollars.
I think that's a great point, and that was talked about at the meeting yesterday. I think that exact same point in terms of how this, if it were to happen, how it gets built to address exactly what you're talking about. So I think it's an excellent point you're bringing up.
Because you can't do this without doing the other. They have to happen simultaneously, parallel planning. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, to the point on funding, I just wanted to show this slide. They raised about $112 million, and you see that about half is from the private sector. The other half came from different sources, the City of Dallas through a bond program. TxDOT chipped in $20 million through the old enhancements program, which is not traditional highway money. This is specifically the enhancement, which is now the TASA program. And at the time, that's when the stimulus program came in. So it is very important to show that the private sector, is very active for a project like this. Now, they told us also that the cost for implementing, in other words, building it and putting the initial amenities over the park to be able to open it was about $97 million. One of the big differences between this project and what we're looking at in El Paso is that this project, the deck project itself, was completely separate, independent from the highway structures, right? So there was no reconstruction of the freeway at the time and all that. This is completely separate from an engineering perspective. So it's, less costly. However, for a second, a follow-up project that the Dallas-Fort Worth region is looking at, I-35, that project, which is in the planning phase, is a Southern Gateway, I think they call it.
Next to the zoo.
Exactly, next to the zoo. That has much more, in common to what we could do here in El Paso, because first of all, they are going to be reconstructing the interstate, I-35. And so, it's a totally different project where you can see some economies of scale of building, while TxDOT builds the transportation project, if you will, the structure is a pavement, whatever it is, and putting the deck over it would be, there are economies of scale. So, so again, just wanted to bring up the idea of the funding, what they told us, but one of the takeaways, I think, the pretty clear takeaways is that this has to be driven by the private sector as well. This is not necessarily driven by the public sector necessarily. It's got to be a partnership.
The funding from the City of Dallas, was that a bond election or what?
Yes, sir, it was.
Yes.
It was. And what we did at the time was we asked the private sector, y'all need to show that you're serious, and they raised $10 million in a span of less than 30 days. Yeah. Well, when they brought it, it was kind of a last-minute thing, and so that they had to rush, and it's a great idea. The thing, like with these kind of projects, like when we were working on the Ports to Plains project, our argument as to why we needed that in the other part of the state is because I-35 was so congested. You had I-35 coalition, I-69 coalition up and running, but don't forget about this part of the state. We could have made the same argument about El Paso, about other projects we could have been doing at that time as well. But our point was, if we do it now, it'll cost this much. If you wait 20 years, it's going to cost this much. Same goes for this. The longer you wait, the more it's going to cost. So I don't know how much our project would cost. I think we've been given estimates, but if we said, no, we're not going to do it, we don't have the money, we have other higher priorities, and if you ever thought about doing it 50 years from now, or 10 or 20 years, I mean, the numbers would be crazy, and you'll never get it done at that point. The other city that's considering this right now, and they were there as well, is Houston. They're looking at doing a deck plaza as well. So, but I think that with the way things are at the federal government right now, all harem scarum all over the place, you could actually take advantage of that chaos and see if there's dollars that you could get at the federal level with all the different packages that they've got there. And so that would be one of the strategies that I think we would deploy.
Thank you very much for presenting this to us. I think one of the most growth areas of our community has been that we have strategically and intentionally thought about how are we creating a space that welcomes and keeps younger people here. To be honest, if we read all the reports about brain drain and how we've lost so many people, projects like these, when I see them, I think how inviting it is for a younger generation as they start to think about their families. And so I know that there's always concerns, but I see a holistic benefit and at least it's exploring the possibilities, because I do think it's speaking to some of the work a lot of us are already doing in our community.
I think you're exactly right, and one of the things that we found, when we didn't think of this in Dallas when we were doing it, but they brought up yesterday how the inviting part, and not necessarily that it brings conventions, but when you do have a convention or when you do have stuff, there's more stuff to do now. And I know that we've been beat up pretty good by the business community about how we need to bring in more conventions. And the argument we've made, like we all have, you need the hotels. Now the hotels are coming up, well, now we need to expand the convention center. I mean, there's always gonna be the next big thing, the next thing that needs to happen. If you look at a map and overlay a topography of El Paso, just like if you were like to fly over it, you look at the uptown area, it's got a lot of concrete jungle action going on, a lot of parking lots. And those should be high-density apartments and things of that nature. And we need to reawaken the uptown area, and we really haven't. I mean, with UTEP, we could really take advantage of that, and it would do exactly what you're talking about. And it would give us one more great big thing to do for conventions, is to bring more people here.
Is there a slide on what the economic benefit has been as a result of Cloud?
They had that information that they shared with us. I don't know if it's in the presentation, but their numbers were staggering. I mean, we could probably get that information. We did tell them realistically, I said, well, we have a challenge with valuations here. In terms of, you know, I'm preaching to the choir, everybody's read in the paper, everybody's got concern with that. Like this year, the residential valuation went up and the commercial valuation went down, which makes no sense whatsoever, but that's another argument. But we did tell them that realistically, I don't know that ours would grow as quickly and as exponentially as theirs, so fast. But yes, you do have that scenario that would play out. West Star being constructed right there, and how that's going to change that dynamic. It really kind of is crowding up over that where the deck would be. I mean, so the deck would park, or deck plaza, we're not supposed to call it a park, for funding purposes. But if the deck plaza were to happen, you could really see the synergy and the connection and the connectivity. The other thing that was brought up, which I think is important to all of us, is safety. They brought up safety, and that right now, the way TxDOT has it designed, the lanes are, I mean, you have like really, broad lanes, or just, it's a broad street. What they're suggesting is that get crunched in a little bit so that it's safer for pedestrians. And I know that we've all been concerned about, like on Mesa and other places, and all the fatalities we have here in El Paso. So we were very much enthused about them bringing that up, because there's actually a safety issue. Now the thing that, and I agree with TxDOT, you have to have the flow. But they were talking about some really cool stuff of how you could still have the flow and still reduce the size of the street so that it could be pedestrian friendly.
Any comments? I think this information should be put on the backup, on the agenda, since it is such a large file. Representative, I don't know if that's sufficient, or if you'd still like an emailed copy, if the item does go on the agenda where it's easily accessible.
What we can do, we can upload it on the MPO website, and then you guys can download it, or, we can try to send it, Dropbox it or something like that, because it is
Would you
pretty.
attach the information that Mr. Gonzalez brought up in the economic impact also, please?
Yeah, definitely, we'll try to get a hold of that, definitely.
Thank you. That's the last item on the agenda. Before we conclude, this has been a difficult month for our community, and this is one of the unique governmental entities where we have leaders from all sectors of government, and I just want to thank everybody for their continued involvement, as they help our community to heal. Thank you to the mayor, to our legislative delegation. I know you're meeting with the governor, to staff, to everybody who's been involved. I know everybody's working really hard to help our community move forward from such a terrible tragedy, and I just want to say thank you and take this opportunity to recognize everybody's work. With that, is there a motion to adjourn? There's a motion and a second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Meeting is adjourned.
Henry.